Hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. My name is William Hemsworth. It is great to be with you all again here on Know the Faith, Defend the Faith. My guest is David Gray. He's an American Catholic theologian, historian, and is the president and publisher of St. Dominic's Media. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Central State University and a Master of Arts in Catholic Theology from Ohio Dominican University. His published work, Inside Prince Hall Freemasonry, predates his conversion to Catholicism. He currently resides in the greater St. Louis area with his wife, Felicia. They're active at the Queen of Peace Catholic community at Scott Air Force Base. He's also an on-air radio personality for the Guadalupe Radio Network, and his show airs Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Eastern. David, how are you doing today? I'm Central. I'm sorry.
William Hemsworth, how's it going, man? Finally glad to be talking to you. Glad to be here on your podcast.
Oh, it's going well. It's great to finally be talking to you. I know we've been corresponding on Twitter and email, so it's finally great to see you face to face, even if it's online and talking with you. It's great.
Right. And you didn't catfish me. You kind of like you do in your pictures, so I appreciate that.
I try to keep the same. What you see is what you get. So, you've been up to a lot. You're doing a lot of video content. You have the radio show going. So, when do you sleep?
That's good. But when I do sleep, I sleep well. I'll tell you that much.
Good.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have you on today to talk about Freemasonry. And I've seen some of your videos. You have the book, the Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry. So what's your experience with Freemasonry, and how did you initially get involved with it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think as far as I can go back into because you as a kid, you think about, okay, what's my oldest memories? When do I really start to, for some people it's around 4, around 5. And so very early, some of my earliest memories were, one was sneaking into my father's room, my stepfather. I think I was maybe 8 or something like that. And as a kid, mom and dad's room was off limits, right? Yeah. But when they were gone, sometimes I'd go in there and try to see what they're doing, what type of things they do. And so I remember I was in my father's dresser drawer, and I'm just rummaging around, and I get to the bottom of the drawer and I see this clear plastic bag, and inside the bag was a pair of white gloves, a Masonic apron. I didn't know it was a Masonic apron, but it's this white leather apron that Freemasons wear. And there's this book, and I opened the book. It looked like a Bible, but then I opened it up. It was completely coded. Now, I didn't know what Freemasonry was back then, but I was so fascinated by the fact that my stepfather had an aspect of his life that just seemed secret, right? It seemed like it's kind of like, running, seeing that you walk into your dad's closet and you see a cape, like, wow, my dad's a superhero, like, whoa. And so I remember that. So that's one of my earliest memories, like encountering this secret world, this mystic world of Freemasonry. And my grandfather on my mother's side, he was also a Freemason. And in the town that I grew up in, Warren, Ohio, being a Freemason was kind of expected for some communities. My grandmother went to a church called the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Freemasons. That church was started after in the 1700s was a Freemason, a Prince Hall Freemason. Prince Hall Freemasons are predominantly Black American Freemasons, and it was started by this guy named Richard Allen. And so Freemasonry and Prince Hall Freemasonry and the African Methodist Episcopal Church, they sort of grew up together. So, when my grandmother, she's encouraging me and suggesting that, yeah, when you come of age, you should become a Freemason. So, I just kind of always knew and always wanted to be a Freemason, because of it seemed like the thing to do. It seemed part of growing up. And it also, when I got to college and I started encountering Freemasons my age, there was like a sort of mysticism too. Like they knew things that other people didn't, right? There was some sort of secret knowledge there. There's some sort of Gnosticism there. And in college, I'm anti-Christian at that point. I don't really have a structured religion. And so what I found in Freemasonry was really a way of life for me. It had a moral law. And so it grounded me as much as you can ground it in a Gnostic at that point. And so for the next 10 years after, I think I'm a sophomore in college. So I'm about 21, I think, because I started college late. So I think I'm about 21, 22 when I become a Freemason. And so for the next 10 years of my life, Freemasonry was my life. I aspired to be the Grand Master of the state of Ohio. That was my life goal. And I started writing a lot of books, got a lot of Masonic fame, as they say, traveled around the world speaking about Freemasonry, was made a fellow in some Masonic societies. I was the first Prince Hall Freemason to cross over to mainstream Freemasonry, where I had membership in Prince Hall, but also had membership in a predominantly white lodge. So it was, like I said, I was going to make it my life. If I had never encountered Christ, that's where, well, if I never became Catholic, because I think if I was a Protestant, I'd still be a Freemason. But if I had never became Catholic, I'll still be a Freemason to this day.
Right, so you're in Freemasonry. Like I said, you're in the Prince Hall Lodge. You're in the Blue Lodge, and then in your video, you said you got involved in other branches of Freemasonry as well. The extensions. Can you tell us about those a little bit?
Yeah. So in Freemasonry, properly, Freemasonry is just the first 3 degrees, which what are commonly called the craft degrees or Blue Lodge degrees. That's the symbolic color. So that's properly Freemasonry. The inner apprentice degree, the fellow craft degree, and the master mason degree. That's Freemasonry. Then outside of that, you have, what's called the Masonic orders, right? Freemasonry comes to be arguably in 1717. That's the first Masonic Grand Lodge, 1717 in England. They're a 3-degree system. And so that's that. And then over a course of a number of years, 100 years, Freemasonry loosely throughout the world starts adopting what's called Masonic bodies. Most popular, of course, is the Scottish Rite, which has a 33-degree system. So I joined that and I became a 32nd. And then in your York Rite, which is different in every country, but in the United States, your York Rite is predominantly your Royal Arch, your Royal Select, and then your Knights Templar. So I went up the York Rite. And then you have your female organizations, your Eastern Stars and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I became Eastern Star. And so in 2 of the bodies, I was what's called a head of the house, or 3 of the bodies. In your craft lodge, I was a worship master, maybe when I was like 25. In the Royal Arch, I was what's called a high priest, the highest officer there. I think I was maybe like 20, 26, 27. And then in your Eastern Stars, I was what's called a worthy patron, the highest office there when I was still in my mid-20s. In all the other houses, and I think I held appointed offices in everyone, but I was never elected. And then in a Grand Lodge, by the time I'm 32, I've been made the second highest appointed officer, which is the district deputy for the Grand Master for Western Ohio.
Okay. See, I was a Freemason myself. I never went to York Rite. I did Scottish Rite.
Okay.
And then I joined the Shrine. And then when they took a break halfway through the ritual to have a beer, I realized it just wasn't for me.
Really? See, I didn't know that about you. I didn't know you touched in Freemasonry. Wow. That was prior to your conversion or after or what?
That's a long story.
Okay. We got to talk about that.
Yeah. But I mentioned that because I was watching your YouTube video on it a couple months ago, and you said I never got into the Shrine because it seemed like a joke. And
yeah.
And that's kind of what it seemed like with me.
So you had a beer halfway through, so you realized it was a joke.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Like, these guys aren't serious. And why would you think they're serious? Because they ride around on little motorcycles and wear strange hats with tassels on them. So I mean, why would you think they're serious anyway? Right.
Now, during your course of the 10 years, I mean, you've done a lot of things in Freemasonry at this point.
Yeah.
When did you start encountering Catholicism?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't while I was a Freemason. I mean, when I was a Freemason, I heard about Catholics just because I used to be in the lodge. I used to be one of the committees I was on was just, new membership, intake and all this stuff.
Okay.
And so I was familiar with the Freemasons from their perspective. Catholics from their perspective were taught that they could not be Freemasons. And so, but from our perspective, it's like, well, if they want to be a Freemason, we nothing's stopping us. And that's all I knew about Catholicism. I grew up in a very Catholic neighborhood, meaning that culturally Catholic. I had a high school, elementary school, a parish, a rectory. I had the nuns of Notre Dame right there in my neighborhood. So I'm kind of familiar that they're different than Protestants, but I don't know a lot about them. And so I was very ignorant when it comes to Catholicism up until the time that I started asking those questions about, what happened to the churches of the Bible.
Okay. I want to skip forward a little bit. No, in your view, does Freemasonry set itself up as like another type of truth?
It definitely. I mean, it says right there in their 1728 Constitution, or is it 1725? But so after
Mhm.
the Grand Lodge of England starts their Grand Lodge system, right, and they create a constitution a few years later, as organizations should. They have a constitution.
Mhm.
But yeah, right there in Anderson's constitution, right, it says two things that's very striking about how it views religion. First, it says that it wants to be the center of union for all men. Right? That one thing that all men can agree upon. And then later on, when it's talking about Masonic behavior in his constitution, it's in Anderson's constitution. It talks about Freemasonry is the universal religion. It uses those words, the universal religion. So right there in his constitution, it calls itself a religion. And so, and Pope Clement in 1738, he kind of saw that Freemasonry sets itself apart. He saw that Freemasonry relies on natural virtue, meaning indifferentism. It has its own law. It obligates men on the Bible. And later on, Pope Leo the 13th, he built upon what Pope Clement the 12th said, because he has a lot more experience with Freemasonry. It appears that maybe when he's a youth, maybe he dabbles in Freemasonry, at least the first degree. So he has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. He's read a lot of books about Freemasonry. And so he calls Freemasonry a form of naturalism, because it relies on just natural aspects. Just there's nothing. It denies the great grace. It denies anything supernatural. And so in that way, the popes are right. Freemasonry is indifferentism, so it does offer an alternative truth. It has its own truth, and it promotes some sort of path towards some sort of afterlife, maybe some sort of salvation, at least betterment of humanity. But it denies grace to do that. So in those two ways, yes, it sets itself up as an alternative truth.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned a couple of the popes already, saying that you couldn't do it. What is the church's position now regarding Freemasonry? Because there seems to be some confusion depending on who you talk to.
Right. Especially if a person is a Masonic sympathizer or Masonic ally, right? They always want to, their common line was, well, that's what the church used to teach, right? So we've changed our teaching, that's the old way. But the popes, I mean, you've had so many popes for the last 300 years talk about the same thing, and they've been so consistent on it, right? And it's kind of hard to say. I know you're a theologian, and I mean, and an apologist, and so I know that it's kind of hard to say the words that the Catholic Church has always taught. Sometimes we get lazy and we say that, but it's very few things. Well, it's a handful of things we can actually say that about the church has always taught. Most of those things are in a creed, but there's some things we have we have to be careful with that. The church has always taught, because some things, it took us time to really articulate it as we do now. But when it comes to Freemasonry, we can definitely say that the church has always taught since we always have, if we have to say a year with that, the church has always articulated this teaching in this way concerning Freemasonry since 1738, with Pope Clement II in his papal bull Indemnity, which mean on high warning. He wrote out the 4 reasons why Catholics cannot be Freemasons, and we see down through the centuries from Clement to Benedict the had to be Benedict the 14th, Pius the 9th, Leo the 13th. Specifically, these popes writing about Freemasonry from 1738 all the way up until Pope Benedict the 16th in his CDF document, right after this is in the 1980s, and then various church conferences from Germany to United States have all articulated the same teaching for the last 300 years. So when we're talking about dogma in the church, dogma versus magisterial statements, or dogma versus non-magisterial statements, dogma versus infallible statements or doctrine. We can definitely put this teaching, because it's been repeated consistently down through the centuries by pope after pope without contradiction for the last 300 years. We can definitely say that this teaching that Catholics cannot be Freemasons belong to that body of, we would call a dogma of the church, because it's consistent, because it's been repeated, because it's been non-contradictory. We can look at this in a way similar to some people like to say the church is teaching its allowance to allow the state to kill people, capital punishment. They would say, well, that's a dogma. And of course that could be argued. But if that's a dogma, this definitely is, because unlike the capital punishment, we see some, over centuries, we see some different opinions versus today versus the past. We see some contradiction, right? So we have to work through that. But this one, there's no contradiction for the last 300 years. So it's definitely a formal teaching of the church that Catholics cannot be Freemasons, because Freemasonry invades, it attacks the Catholic Church. It promotes indifferentism, and it promotes naturalism. And so a Catholic cannot no more be a Freemason. A Catholic can no more be a Freemason than a Catholic can be a Mormon, or a Catholic can be a Muslim, or a Catholic can be Jehovah's Witnesses, because you cannot have two different truths.
Okay. Now, David, is that how Freemasonry attacks the Catholic Church, is because it's setting itself up as another truth?
Yeah, I would say the popes would say that it attacks Freemasonry first as an alternative truth, right? It has a different path that denies grace, denies Jesus Christ. But also the popes would say that Freemasonry has attacked the church on just a natural and political level. And we see this especially in the 1700s and 1800s. We see this especially in Germany and Europe with and we see this in all the revolutions that there were in the 1700s and 1800s. Excuse me.
Sure.
And we see that, and it's hard to say Freemasons, right? But we say that there seems to be a huge Masonic influence in representative governments, such as in England, that exports Freemasonry to monarchical rule places where there's kings, there's royalty, monarchs rule. We can see Freemasons heavily involved in this exportation of Freemasonry to these countries where the Catholic Church has a strong relationships with the monarchs. And what they want to do is deconstruct the monarchy and bring in representative government, so that the government can then take charge of things like schools and define marriage. And this was the popes have consistently saw, especially Leo and Pius IX, that the Freemasons were heavily involved in this attack to secularize society and take certain things out of the hands of the church and put them in the hands of the government. And in that regard, we would say that the Freemasons have Leo XIII had called the Masonic program, and it's actually a Masonic program. He got this from a guy named Garibaldi, was a famous revolutionary Freemason. And so Garibaldi had wrote this Masonic program, which was, and this is before Alta Vendetta, right? From the Carbonari, which Garibaldi wrote this Masonic program to demonstrate how to attack the Catholic Church and how to secularize the world. And so in Pope Leo XIII, he saw this. And so he called, that's what he means by the Masonic program in his encyclical, was it Humani Genius? And so he would call that the Masonic program. And so there's this outline to just, and so in this regard, we could say that the Freemasons have been very successful, probably the most successful in any other organization or government that has attacked the church. In this regard, they had attacked the church through government representation, through laws and through policies, to create this society where there's church and there's state, and where that state is in charge of those things that the church is in charge of. And this is why you see inevitably Freemasonry inevitably leads to communism in that regard, because this communism is a deeper escalation of the state pushing the church out and being in charge of every aspect of our life. So yeah,
Gotcha.
so in those two ways, in the spiritual sphere and in the political sphere, Freemasonry is an attack against the Catholic Church.
Okay. So what happens to a Catholic if they decide to become a Freemason?
Yeah, well, the church has taught consistently that the penalties have definitely changed over the years. We can say the penalties have changed, right? Since 1738, it used to be that even if you associate with a Freemason or do any business with them, or if you own a business and you allow them to meet there, you're excommunicated, right? So
Wow.
the penalties have changed over time as far as, you know, what happens to you. But the one thing that's been consistent is that you are out of communion with the Catholic Church, and you cannot receive Holy Communion because you're not in communion with the church. Some people today may not like to call that excommunication, right? Formerly Latte Sentia excommunication. So, you know, and I argue that I will argue in my book that, you know, Catholic Freemasons are excommunicated. But one thing we can all agree upon is that whether we want to call that formal excommunication, we all agree that it is a form of excommunication,
Right.
because if you are a Freemason, you're initiated, and you're Catholic, you cannot receive Holy Communion. So therefore, there is some sort of break from communion with the church. There is a grave sin there with you being a Freemason and a Catholic that permanently or temporarily breaks your relationship with the church, and it needs a remedy, and needs confession. Therefore, if you cannot receive Holy Communion, if it is a grave sin, which it is, Pope Benedict the 16th even said this, and if it requires confession for you to get to restore your relationship with the Catholic Church, then it is excommunication by all intents and purposes. Whether we want to say it's formally Latte Sentia or not, it is a form of not being in communion with the Catholic Church.
Great. Now, what can we do as Catholics, David, to maybe evangelize other Catholics that have got into Freemasonry?
Yeah, the Catholics, I think that's the easy question. I think Protestants are a lot harder, but Catholics, one thing I do, like I said in my book, was I don't get into the conspiracies. I don't get into the revolutions so much. I think that's interesting. That's important stuff to know, but I don't get into the Masonic ritual so much. It's you know, some aspects of it important. It's good to know what Freemasons are obligating themselves to as a Catholic. But one thing I focus on when I'm evangelizing Catholics is that, like the questions you asked me at the beginning of our talk, is that what does the Catholic Church teach? And why does it teach it? And so I think that's really the best way to evangelize Catholics, because it pulls at their obligation to be obedient to what the church teaches. If we're going to be obedient to other aspects of things the Catholic Church teaches, such as marriage, such as chastity, such as when can we receive Holy Communion, when we cannot, who can celebrate the homily. I mean, so much. I mean, celebrate the Holy Mass. If we're going to be obedient to all these other things, then we all should be obedient to this dogmatic teaching of the Catholic Church. Otherwise, we're not in communion with the Catholic Church. And so I think that's very important to really hammer in that one aspect of being obedient to what the church teaches.
Okay. So your book, The Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry, what made you decide to write the book?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I really talk much about that outside the book. But so I think I wrote an essay back maybe 2010, William, just talking about you know, why Catholics cannot be a Freemason. It's just a short essay, just succinctly hammering in, you know, those basic points. But then as time went on, I wrote this book in 2000. I think it's published in 2020. And so over the next 10 years, I began to see, and people began inviting me to speak at their parishes or their conference or retreats about why Catholics cannot be Freemasons. And so, William, the questions I started getting began to show me that a lot of Catholics really don't know why it is, because there's been a lot of writing, a lot of books by different Catholics, and a lot of videos being put out there about, you know, the plots and the intrigue and all the little sexy reasons why Catholics cannot be Freemasons. But that's not why. And so what I wanted to do, and there seemed to be a lot of weird ways, you know, and you know, you had some background of Freemasonry, so you've probably seen this stuff too, about just the confusing language and these well-meaning Catholics who were never Freemasons, how they portray Freemasonry in a sort of, and it's well-meaning, but it sort of gets off the mark. And in the arguments they present, if you're trying to talk to a Catholic who is a Freemason, there are some arguments they present about why you cannot be a Catholic and a Freemason that are ineffective, right? They're not effectual in the sense that, for example, some of these books talk a lot about the Masonic ritual. So if a person is a Catholic and they go up to this person who's a Freemason, who's a Catholic, and they say, oh, you can't be a Freemason because your ritual teaches this and this and this. Because the Masonic ritual is different in every jurisdiction, it puts you in a very awkward position because you're trying to tell them that they cannot be a Freemason because their ritual teaches this. And then how do you know that that Freemason has experienced that ritual or that those were or heard those words exactly? And so it allows, a lot of these arguments easily allows a Catholic Freemason to dismiss the argument whatsoever. Or if you're talking about the revolutions, oh, you can't be a Freemason because Freemasons were involved in the French Revolution and there's a plot against the church. Or so many different things you could bring up. And so that's what all these books and essays were really trying to focus on, why you can be a Catholic and Freemason. So when I put the book together, the Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry, what I tried to put together was just the solid teaching of the Catholic Church. This is what the Catholic Church teaches, why you cannot be a Catholic Freemason. So I went through every document, every cyclical, every papal bull, which was ever issued by any pope or conference of the Catholic Church. And I put it in here. And then I add commentary behind it, explaining it in context of history and theology, to give a clear picture about what the church has always taught. And then in the beginning of the book, I give, I think it's been 3 or 4 chapters just talking about Freemasonry, what it is, exactly what it is. And then one chapter is really the most important chapter. I talk about why Freemasonry is a religion, and I talk about the degrees in the sense of I call the degrees essentially sacraments. They're Masonic sacraments, and so that's a very important chapter. And so, but that's really the main reason, William, just to clear the air, clear the confusion, and give just one solid, comprehensive source on this subject. That's consistent with what the church teaches.
Great. Now, in addition to that book, I also want to recommend, it has nothing to do with Freemasonry, but Divine Symphony. That's a fantastic book. So great job on that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's my favorite book.
I have a friend of mine, Ed, he emailed me the other day. He's like, have you read this book? David Gray's written. Like, yeah, it's a great book. I've read it already.
Oh, thanks, William.
Now, in January, you got on with Guadalupe Radio Network. How's that going?
Man, have you ever done radio?
Not live.
Not live. Oh man, it is. I always wanted to do radio, right? And but I didn't know it was so much work, right? I mean, just the hours that you spend before the show, prepping, getting yourself ready, and then everything that can go wrong during the radio show live. You know, as far as technical stuff. Man, it's so much work during radio, but I think I'm finally getting to the point. I started in mid-January, so now a few months later, I think I'm finally getting comfortable with it, and I really enjoy it. It's a fast format, and so it's just once a week, and I'm glad I didn't sign up to do every day because oh my gosh, it's a lot of work. But I love Guadalupe Radio Network, and they have a lot of supportive staff. My producer Cecil, she's great. So all the support is there, but man, it's a lot of work to put on a quality show. But yeah, so it's voicing Truth and Reason on Wednesdays, like you said, and yeah, a lot of great conversations with interesting people.
So what are some of the conversations you've had?
Mm-hmm. So I've tried to have a rhythm of the show. So every third Wednesday is on Pro-Life Wednesday. So I typically have Janique Stewart on there, who's a pro-life leader. We have great conversations about what's going on in the world as far as attacks on life and chastity and things like that. And then the fourth Wednesday of every month is finance. You know, we talk about finance from a Catholic perspective. And then the first couple of weeks, a couple of Wednesdays in a month, I try to have someone known who's written an interesting book or essay that I want to talk about and dig deeper into. So it's conversations about timely subjects, and there's no bounds about what we cannot talk about as far as I might be, every show I do a monologue for 10 or 15 minutes, and I've talked about bourbon, I've talked about donuts, and so uh I had people in there who weren't Catholic, and so just good conversations about different aspects that people who are more traditional in their faith or consistently Catholic in their faith, that will definitely find interesting, inspiring, and give them ammunition to go out and do battle in the world.
Great. Well, David, I really do thank you for coming on today. Where can our listeners learn more about you?
Yeah, stop into my website, davidlgray.info. That's DAVIDLGRAY.info. And that's really jumping off point. You can then jump over to my YouTube or whatever else I'm doing. But or you can just type in to your browser or Google whatever, David L. Gray, and I'll pop up. Don't type David Gray, because there's some guy who sings folk songs or something like that. He doesn't look anything like me. So you have to put the L in there. So David L. Gray.
I made that mistake this morning at 1 a.m. All right. Well, David, thank you very much. It's great to finally talk with you. Thanks for coming on.
God bless you. God bless your ministry.
You too. Thank you.